Tonight we are in the desert of southern Jordan, and we are looking for what is basically a discount deathstalker scorpion. And this is a rare instance in which I actually already know where all three individual scorpions are going to be before we have even begun searching. They just aren't all that common, I guess. However, these three are quite reliable to spot every single time I look for them. We're basically guaranteed to see all three of them tonight. We have our first Compsobuthus up here on the wall. And I'm not finding these with white light, by the way. I am finding them with ultraviolet light. I'm just not showing it on camera for the most part. Anyway, these are flighty, so I'm going to take it down off of camera. And if you're familiar with Lyris, or deathstalker scorpions, you can tell that it has a bit of a resemblance with ones like Lyris hebreus, for example. And that's the deathstalker that's found in this area. They are in the same family. They're both buthids, or the arrow-breasted scorpions. These are much smaller than deathstalkers, and presumably much less toxic. Deathstalkers are more terrestrial than these scorpions that we're looking at, but there are morphological differences as well, obviously. This includes the structure of carinae on the carapace, the length of the legs relative to the body, the color of the tergites, among other things as well. But one really uncanny similarity between the two is the order in which colors show up on the metasoma, or tail. Between the two, they're pretty much identical. I apologize for not having a deathstalker to compare this one with. In my area, they don't seem to be active around this time, but there are two species in the genus Lyris that live here. We have a Hemidactylus mindiae up here on the wall. Got it. This is called the Mount Sinai gecko, and it's quite a restricted species of gecko, known from only two localities. One area in the south of the Sinai Peninsula, and the other where I am right now, in Jordan near the Gulf of Aqaba. These were described recently in 2005 when they were separated from the Hemidactylus turcicus complex, otherwise known as the Mediterranean house geckos, a species that I've seen quite a few times. The Mount Sinai gecko likely has almost the exact same ecology as the Mediterranean house gecko. In addition to this, of course, they do look quite similar as well. In fact, I don't actually know how to tell the difference between the two, but between the local populations of these two species, it does seem that this gecko that we have here has a much lighter eye band than the Mediterranean house gecko. Despite being quite restricted, these don't seem to be too rare here. On average, I see about 1 or 2 a night. They seem to have a preference to come out later. I usually see them emerge after midnight. I didn't notice this. Look, here's our first Hemidactylus mindiae that I just released. And there's actually another one back here. We have an Adesmia cancellata down here in this bush. That is a species of darkling beetle. And this one isn't supposed to be out right now. This is a daytime active species. But there's a good chance that maybe it's not doing so well, and that's why it's out right now. These are commonly referred to as the pitted beetle for quite an obvious reason. But this isn't the only species of Adesmia that has pocked elytra. There's even another one in this area. Like I just mentioned, these are diurnal, quite strictly actually, and one of very few diurnal darkling beetle species that lives around here. Diurnal or nocturnal, this is also the most common species of darkling beetle that lives out here, and it's responsible for the plurality of insect tracks that are found in the sand. Because it's diurnal, it has to deal with the desert heat and the heat of the sand that it walks on, and that's why it has these elongated legs that allows them to walk quickly and create a little bit of extra space between their body and the sand. These pitted beetles have actually been confirmed to have a higher heat tolerance than some sympatric darkling beetle species that are actually also found here, such as Pimelia. Here is our second Compsobuthus, actually a little further from where I usually find it, which is quite convenient because there are fewer cracks around here. Anyway, I'm going to get this one down for filming just like with the last one. Alright, this second Compsobuthus that we have here is a juvenile. Something that you'll notice on this juvenile that is also true for other scorpions is that it has less fuscous markings. This one is a little over half the size of the last one that we saw. Aside from the bit that I just mentioned, its coloration is pretty much identical, as you can tell. This one is actually pretty close in size to the other species of Compsobuthus that lives out here, and I am going to show you that one. It is also a lithophile, but it is far more common than the one that we're looking at right now. But unfortunately, it's much more generic too. You can find these two species practically on the same rocks, but there are less of the second species of Compsobuthus where we can find these ones that we're looking at. so the partitioning between the two is slightly observable. After finding this particular juvenile Compsobuthus for the first time, I decided to go back and check a bunch of the other species of Compsobuthus, perhaps dozens or over 100, to make sure that I hadn't missed any more than the 3 that we're seeing tonight. We're looking at a large-eared dormouse in this crack here, Eliomys melanurus. It does look a bit frightened, so I'm going to try to keep this quick. There are quite a few rodents out here, and the vast majority of them live on the ground, mostly in the sand. There's far fewer in the rocks in terms of numbers and diversity. And I think the reason that these are dominating so well is because geckos are most common on the rock walls around here, and they make up quite a large portion of these rodents' diet, in addition to arthropods. Also, before I leave, we can appreciate this bushy tail that they have. Here are a few polyphaga cockroaches that I dug out of the sand here. Actually, only dug one of them out of this area. The other ones were a couple of meters apart. These are commonly called Egyptian sand cockroaches. Now, I guess they could also be Heterogamodes. I'm not actually sure how to tell the difference between the two, but they have roughly the same biology either way. These operate much like a mole. They move 1 centimeter below the sand, and when you find their tracks, you can actually see where they exit and where they go back into the sand. What they're searching for when they do this is food. Otherwise, they're much deeper in the sand, or they're hiding in the packed sand around bushes. They can also be found quite easily underground debris if the weather is more mild. Like many Psammophilus insects, you can see that these cockroaches have spines on the tarsi that are enlarged that help them dig through the sand. Their tracks can be quite easily confused with that of the larvae of Tenebrionidae, or the darkling beetles, but they have different track shapes when they surface. Both the cockroach and the larva are likely the 2 most common large insect prey found in the sand around here. There's quite a long list of animals that prey on them, especially because they're nocturnal and largely defenseless. And the 3 that we've been looking at are females. They are flightless, meanwhile the males are flying around right now, and they are typically lighter than the females. There are some engravings up here on this rock wall that I think are worth taking a look at. Here they are closer up. And you can see that there's quite a few of these animals here. These are quite likely Nubian ibexes, potentially the most common species of ungulate that lives out here. There's actually a piece of it that continues over here. Basically all of these are Nubian ibexes, though in some of these engravings you can find gazelles, which out here would be Dorca's gazelle and the mountain gazelle. And though it's a little bit tough to see, the last piece is over here. And there's another piece of engraving nearby that I want to show you that possibly contains the Arabian oryx, which is a species that went extinct in the wild in 1972, but was reintroduced in the early 80s. Here is another piece on the wall, much smaller than the last one, and it extends a little bit over here. This is not original, but this is. Both sets of these engravings are in places that are pretty sheltered. This is not really a coincidence, but there are some engravings or evidence of engravings that are in less sheltered areas. And when you're walking around the mountains out here, you can find evidence of pictures that used to exist on the walls, but are on the parts that are more obviously eroded. Here's our second species of Compsobuthus, this little guy. And it really isn't all that large. It's gonna be a little tough to get it out of there. Give me a second. This one is an adult. I've not seen any that were larger than this. It's about half of the size of a full-grown individual of the species that we're looking for. Along with scorpions in the genus Orthocyrus, these are the smallest scorpion species that are out here. These are almost exclusively found in rocks, especially on rock walls or on piles that are raised above the ground. And as I mentioned, they are quite common, and this, paired with the fact that they're quite tolerant of each other, means that you can find groups in crevices. Usually not more than 2, and I've never seen more than 3 in one crack. Much like the other Compsobuthus, I have not identified this one. It's not really worth it for this genus. The genus contains over 40 species, making it one of the most diverse genera in the family Buthidae, which is the most diverse family of scorpions. But visually speaking, they don't look very diverse. Most of them look like some kind of slight variation of the one that we're looking at right now. We have a gecko down here. This one is Stenodactylus. This one is a juvenile, and it is actually in shed, likely the latest in-shed lizard that has been on the channel yet. It should be ready to tear that off, maybe today or tomorrow. That causes it to look quite gray, But even if it wasn't in shed, this is quite a gray species, at least in comparison to the Middle Eastern short-fingered gecko, Stenodactylus doriae, which can have quite a golden look. But in terms of shape, the juveniles of these two species look very similar to one another, but later as adults, in terms of morphology, they diverge quite a bit. Unlike other same genus geckos that live out here, and there are quite a few, the partitioning between these two geckos in terms of habitat is quite apparent. The Middle Eastern short-fingered gecko prefers as much sand as it can get. Meanwhile, these elegant geckos tend to live in the flatter areas that are somewhat sandy, but mostly mixed with rocks. The northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is near to where I am right now, is actually the main transition zone between the two species. This one is mostly widespread in North Africa, while the Middle Eastern short-fingered gecko is mainly widespread in the Arabian Peninsula. Here is our third and final scorpion for the night. And you can see that this one is quite a bit larger, than the last two. Give me a moment while I take this one down as well. And this one is only about 50 meters from the juvenile that we saw. The way that they're flattened and gracile, you can tell that they are quite well adapted for living in crevices, as many of the ones in these rocks are only a few millimeters wide. Perhaps, unfortunately, this is likely the first and last video that I'll ever do on Compsobuthus, because morphologically speaking, Compsobuthus is basically just an amalgamation of what other buthid species did better. Most frequently, they're knockoffs of Hottentotta species, like the other species I just showed you. And there probably aren't more than a couple other Compsobuthus species that are more interesting than the one that we're looking at right now. They'll probably still show up in future videos, however, just not as the main focus. Well, that is all of the Compsobuthus that we are going to see tonight. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.